Right now, time for our regular weekly focus on a key issue of climate change. And in Climate Critical today, we're casting back 9 months to when Tonga was hit by a volcanic eruption and then a tsunami, which further showed its huge vulnerability to rising sea levels resulting from climate change. That experience has hastened the Tongan government's own decision to take the lead in pursuing ways to bolster the country's resilience against this changing climate. And it's taking aim at what are called invasive species, animals and plants which have found their way onto the islands of the Pacific, undermining the natural habitats and therefore the ability of these small islands to look after themselves. Here's how it works. From on high, a thing of beauty, Pacific Islands, one after the next, dotting an azure sea. But at ground level, this is a biodiversity disaster. Rats, invaders of so many of these islands over so many years. They've systematically devoured the local bird life and sea life. And as they've feasted, they've disrupted the natural order of things on each uninhabited island and atoll.
Anyone who's lived in the Pacific looks at the Pacific as a paradise, but it's quite different from what it used to be. There's so many introduced species that have become invasive and have outcompeted and taken over from our native species.
And as the seabirds have gone, so the fish have gone, and the coral reefs off the islands have lost critical nutrients for their own growth and resilience, making them more vulnerable to the changes in climate, which are among these islands' greatest challenges. But perhaps the tide is turning. This is a rat eradication programme, and it's working. Dropping poison by drone, the invasive species have themselves been wiped out, and heralded the return of the natives, the birds, and behind them the fish, the sea life, replenishing vital fishing grounds for local islanders to harvest in a sustainable world.
Research have also shown that if we can remove rats, then seabird populations will recover, and the nutrients from the guano will improve health, resilience, and productivity of coral reefs.
It's a rare cause for optimism in a world where small gains can have a significant impact on their chances of survival. Yeah, that's the picture. Well, Richard Griffiths is the head of operations for island conservation at the Pacific Regional Invasive Species Management Support Service, PRISMS, and joins us now from New Zealand. Richard, thanks very much indeed for joining us. We've just sort of painted out the way in which the eradication of invasive species does have an impact on climate change. How big a deal is it, though, really, in the grand scheme of things?
To answer that question, David, it might be good to start with why islands are so important. And islands make up just a small part of the Earth's land area, but they support a disproportionate amount of its biodiversity. Unfortunately, that biodiversity and those islands have been severely impacted. 75% of all extinctions, David, in the last few hundred years have occurred on islands. That said, islands also represent a massive opportunity. We can make a huge difference for biodiversity and for human livelihoods on islands.
But just tell me this, Richard, how is the eradicating of rats, for example, how is that helping uninhabited islands to protect themselves, to improve their resilience against climate change?
Yes, so climate change, as you've noted, is a massive threat to the Pacific, and communities and biodiversity on the islands of the Pacific, especially low-lying islands, is at stake. Their future is at stake. What we know we need is our islands and our reefs to be as healthy as possible. And we also know that reefs are living organisms. They can grow. And I'm a hopeful person, David. And some studies show that reefs could keep up with rising sea levels if the conditions are provided for them to do so.
Right, so that's the way in
Now-
which this works. Sorry to interrupt you, Richard.
Yes.
In which case, I can see, and we've seen the pictures there, how treating an uninhabited island is one thing, and you can do it, and drones clearly are another way of helping. What about inhabited islands? And what about Tonga, for example? I mean, is that a realistic proposition?
Yes, it is, David. We can remove invasive species from islands. We've been very successful in doing that over the last few decades. Rats, for example, have been removed from more than 500 or 600 islands now. And removing invasive species is one tangible action that we can take to improve the health of our islands and also our reefs.
This is just, I mean, we're talking about rats here. We should broaden the spectrum a bit. Invasive species covers everything pretty much, doesn't it? Plant life, animal life, it's a very big challenge.
Yeah, but rats are a great example. So rats have had a devastating impact on seabird populations across the Pacific. And that loss of seabirds has destroyed the intimate connection that we know exists between islands and the ocean and the marine environment. And I think it was a team of UK researchers in the Chagos archipelago, led by Nick Graham, who first brought this to our attention, that islands with healthy seabird populations have healthy, productive reefs. The coral is more productive, there's more fish, and those reefs are what we need if we're to persevere in the face of climate change.
Yeah, and develop that sort of a return to sustainability of sorts, I suppose, both for the environment and for the communities. It is a drop in the ocean in many ways, it seems, Richard. It of itself isn't going to change our climate, is it?
No, of course, we have to stop the use of fossil fuels, certainly, but at the same time, many of the changes that climate change is going to bring are already in play. And so we know we need to adapt to the coming changes in sea level. And removing rats, removing invasive species is a real tangible action that those communities can take.
Absolutely. Just one very quick point, and that's money. You know, these things always cost. But is this an expensive sort of project?
Eradication projects are expensive. That said, they are achievable, and there is funding out there. We know that, David. We do need Pacific leaders to understand that this work is possible, and that in doing so, they'll improve their chances to weather the storm, so to speak.
Yeah. Richard, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you very much indeed for running through the possibilities of eradication of invasive species. Richard Griffiths, thank you.
My pleasure.